to Siman Yud Gimel in the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, Arba tzitzis ma'akvin zezeh. Each corner of the tzitzis, people have done Daf Yomi, we had this recently, each corner of the tzitzis is makiv, meaning it's essential. If you have 3 corners with tzitzis and 1 corner without, we don't say, well, you got 3 out of 4 mitzvahs. No, you're not yoytz at all. Shekol zman she'ein bo kol arba, eina mitziyatzis kahalacha. If you don't have all 4 corners, it's not a proper tzitzis. V'hayoytz b'Rosh Hashanah Shabbos chayav chatas. And if you go out to Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, you chayav chatas, because the strings are considered unnecessary. Right? Clothing is only allowed to be worn when there's no eruv, if the clothing serve a purpose. Now that purpose could be style, it could be for warmth. The tzitzis that hang on the corner of the beged, if they're part of a proper talis, then they're part of the beged. But if they're not part of the proper talis, then they're really unnecessary. And if they're unnecessary, then it's considered a burden, and it's considered chilul Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah points out that in addition to the isser of going out to Rosh Hashanah with a beged with only 3 tzitzis, the truth is this applies to all the halachas. If you ever have a beged that's puzzle, whatever the psul is, the psul could be that it's like a t-shirt tzitzis that is majority sealed. That could be a psul. The psul could be because the tzitzis is too small. Whatever the psul is, if you then wear said beged in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, it's going to be chilul Shabbos. Mechaber writes in Beis, if the tzitzis are done properly, then mutar latzis Rosh Hashanah, then you're allowed to wear them outside of the eruv. Bein talis katan, bein talis gadol, you're allowed to wear a talis katan when there's no eruv, a talis gadol. Afil bisman hazeh she'ein lanu tcheles, and even nowadays where we don't have tcheles, don't think that makes all of our talesim and our talis katans puzzle. It's not puzzle, it's just not the complete mitzvah, but it's still something, and therefore it's allowed to be worn when there's no eruv. But says the Ramah, it has to be worn properly. You can't wear it the way conservative people wear it, like a giant scarf. It has to be on the body. But if it's done properly, then it's fine. And the Ramah writes, there is a cheskes kashrus, which means that if unless you're aware that something got damaged, we assume that the talis is kosher until you aware otherwise. And you technically do not have to check the talis before you go outside of the eruv to ensure that it's kosher, because there's a cheskes kashrus that as long as it was kosher yesterday, we assume that it's still kosher today. Mishnah Berurah points out you're allowed to wear on Shabbos when there's no eruv tzitzis even at night, even though, as we'll see later on, there are many opinions that hold that at night you're not obligated to wear tzitzis. So l'chora, if you're not obligated to wear tzitzis, you're not kind of mitzvah, so then it's an unnecessary burden. No, he says mishum denoy hu lebeged. When the tzitzis are properly, when they're kosher on a beged, then it's considered part of the beged. And the same way you're allowed to have a beged that has buttons. So the tzitzis are part of the beged. Now, if the tzitzis are puzzle, then the mamish not necessary to be there. But if they're kosher, then even if you're not mekayim a mitzvah at this moment, because it's nighttime, it's considered part of the ornaments of the beged is to have tzitzis on it, and therefore it's allowed to be worn even at night. Mishnah Berurah points out that when we said that there's a cheskes kashrus, that you don't have to check it before you go to the area where there's no eruv, the cheskes kashrus is kiven shabbat kuba boiker be'eshay mevarach alavisha v'nimsu shleimim. It doesn't mean that you didn't check it ever. You're supposed to check it before you make the bracha. So you check it that morning, and then a couple hours later you go where there's no eruv, then it's fine, because you could assume that there was no psul in between that time. Sul in rogel lefasik bizman muat kazeh. Now, it shows you that you have to check it at some point, at least Shabbos morning. You just can rely on the morning check for the afternoon. Yakut Yosef is a little more lenient. He holds that there's a cheskes kashrus legamri. Even if it wasn't checked today, you could rely on the fact that it was checked previously at some point and it was kosher, and it remained kosher until proven otherwise. Mishnah Berurah writes at the end, though, he says that, l'chora, as he said before, you have to check it on Shabbos morning. He says, but the oilam is not makbid to check it properly. So what we'll do is we'll stop here, and tomorrow when we get to the Ramah, we'll come back to the Biur Halacha as a potential understanding of why the oilam is not makbid to check the talis on Shabbos morning, to check the tzitzis, to check that it's kosher. But perhaps tomorrow we'll have a better understanding.